Hello there and welcome. And tonight, I invite you to slow down, take a deep breath, and let your thoughts drift as I share a tale full of mystery and quiet suspense. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these nighttime stories, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It truly helps us continue creating them. And just out of curiosity, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Whether it's the middle of the night or a quiet afternoon nap, you're exactly where you need to be. Now get cozy, pull the blanket a little closer, let your muscles relax, starting with your shoulders, unclench your jaw. Let your eyelids grow heavy if they wish to, because what you're about to hear is a story that begins like any other ordinary night, but ends in a place no one ever expected. I had been babysitting for the Bakers for a few months. It was always an easy job. Their daughter Lily was sweet, polite, the kind of child who listened the first time and never gave me trouble. The house itself was in one of those upscale neighborhoods where the grass always looks like it was trimmed with scissors and the cars parked in the driveways probably cost more than all 4 years of my college combined. Mr. Baker was polite, though a bit distant. He had the kind of presence that suggested he spent most of his time in a suit, probably speaking in boardrooms or leading conference calls. Mrs. Baker, on the other hand, was warm and chatty, always asking how my classes were going or if I wanted something to eat before they left. They seemed normal, maybe even a little boring, but normal people don't usually have hidden rooms in their basements. Normal people don't keep files filled with surveillance photos and strange documents behind secret doors. It all started on a Thursday evening. I arrived at exactly 7 p.m. Mr. Baker was just heading out as I came in. He gave me the same routine instructions: Lily's bedtime at 8:30, snacks in the kitchen, call if anything comes up. I nodded along, barely paying attention. My mind was already thinking ahead to the history paper I needed to finish, something about the French Revolution that I was dreading but couldn't avoid any longer. The night went smoothly. Lily and I played a board game, and after a bit of coaxing, she climbed into bed without a fuss. I read her a bedtime story, some fairy tale with talking animals and magical forests, and by 9 o'clock, the house was silent. I curled up on the couch with my laptop, cracked open my textbook, and tried to focus. That's when I heard it, a soft, mechanical, whirring noise, faint, almost like a fan or maybe some machinery. At first, I thought it was nothing, just the house settling, or maybe the heating system turning on. But the sound didn't stop. It continued, steady and low, just barely loud enough to notice once I was paying attention. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But you know how it goes. Curiosity is a stubborn thing. Eventually, I closed the lid of my laptop, got up, and followed the sound. It led me to the basement. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing, listening. The whirring was clearer now, though still faint, like it was coming from deep within the walls. I slowly descended, my fingers brushing along the cool concrete wall as I reached the bottom step. The basement was nothing like the musty storage spaces I was used to. This one was fully finished, soft carpet underfoot, recessed lighting, a huge flat-screen TV mounted on one wall, surrounded by plush leather couches. There was even a pool table in the corner. It was the kind of basement designed for entertaining, not hiding secrets. And yet, the sound was coming from somewhere deeper, I walked slowly across the room, drawn toward the far corner where a large bookshelf stood, seemingly built into the wall. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. There, at the edge of the shelf, was a sliver of light, barely visible unless you were looking for it, a thin line glowing from behind the bookcase. My pulse quickened. I ran my hand along the edge, feeling for something, a seam, a switch, anything out of place. And then I found it, a small indentation like a button. I pressed it without thinking, and with a quiet click, the bookshelf moved. It swung open just slightly, revealing a door. The light was brighter now, spilling from the crack between the door and the frame. The mechanical whirring I'd heard earlier was louder, more defined, clearly coming from inside. I froze, my hand hovering over the handle. Every instinct told me I shouldn't go any farther, that this was private, that it wasn't mine to see. But curiosity once again proved stronger than caution. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. Inside was a small room. Inside was a small room, not much larger than a walk-in closet, dimly lit by a single overhead bulb that cast a pale glow across the walls. The sound, the soft, mechanical whir I'd followed, was coming from an old desktop computer, humming quietly in the corner, its screen still active. I stepped inside cautiously, every movement deliberate, as if the room might react if I moved too fast. It didn't feel like it belonged in that beautiful, polished basement. The air was cooler, slightly musty, like it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. The walls were lined with filing cabinets and metal shelves stacked with boxes, some labeled in handwriting that looked rushed, almost paranoid. And then there were the photographs, dozens of them, pinned to corkboards and taped to the walls. Grainy black and white shots, surveillance-style images, people walking down streets, sitting in cafes, entering buildings. Some of the faces had red ink circles drawn around them. Others had notes scrawled underneath, dates, times, odd phrases like "target confirmed" or "no tail clear." I stared at them, heart pounding. This wasn't some forgotten storage room. It was an active workspace. Someone was watching people, tracking them. But why? And who? On a nearby desk was a thick folder, worn at the edges, as if it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. I opened it slowly. Inside were documents, pages of information on people I didn't recognize, dossiers almost, names, dates of birth, occupations. Some of them had photos paper-clipped to the pages. A few looked like driver's license photos, others surveillance again. But one of the pages made my stomach drop. It was about Lily, her full name, birth date, medical records, school schedule, even a map that marked her walking route home. Why would they need this level of detail on their own daughter? I backed away from the desk, shaken. Suddenly the room felt claustrophobic, too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I turned toward the computer. Its screen was still active, open to what looked like a live camera feed. I counted 4 windows, each showing a different location. One was the backyard, another Lily's bedroom. The third appeared to be a parking lot. The fourth, I leaned in. It was the living room, the one I had just come from, and on the couch was my laptop, exactly where I'd left it. I was being watched. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively glanced around, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. But I was still alone. I backed out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I didn't bother trying to close the bookshelf. I didn't want to touch anything else. I practically ran up the basement stairs, two at a time, heart racing. When I reached the main floor, I paused, hand against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. The house was still quiet, peaceful even, but everything felt different now. I glanced at the time. 9:27 p.m. Mr. Baker wouldn't be home for at least another hour. I had time? But time to do what? Report it? To who? The police? And what would I say? Hi, yes, I found a secret room full of spy files in a wealthy family's basement. Also, I'm the babysitter. Even I wasn't sure what I'd seen. So instead, I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I checked on Lily. She was still asleep, curled up with a stuffed animal, breathing softly. Peaceful, innocent, and completely unaware. I closed her door gently and walked back to the living room, sat down, opened my laptop, tried to focus on my history paper like nothing had happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The photos, the files, the camera feed, the fact that someone had been watching me. Was it Mr. Baker? He did spend a lot of time away. Was it part of some kind of private investigation firm? Was Mrs. Baker involved, or was someone else using their basement without their knowledge? Nothing made sense. And then I noticed something strange. There was a new file on my desktop. I hadn't seen it before. It was named simply, "Do Not Open." I stared at it for a long time, and then, of course, I clicked. The file opened slowly, as if even the computer was reluctant to reveal what was inside. It wasn't a document. It was a video, just under 3 minutes long. No title, no timestamp, no indication of where or when it had been recorded. I clicked play. The screen faded from black to what looked like handheld footage. Shaky at first, then stabilizing. It showed a narrow hallway, dim lighting, concrete walls, the same texture I'd felt while going down to the baker's basement. I leaned in. A figure came into view, at first just a silhouette, then clearer. A woman, maybe in her 30s, blonde hair pulled back. She looked nervous. Her eyes darted toward the camera and away again, like she wasn't supposed to be there. She walked slowly down the hall. Her hand paused at a metal door, the same one I had opened earlier tonight. And then she turned back toward the camera, her lips moving. There was no sound. The footage was muted. But I could see the shape of the words, "Turn back." The screen cut to black. No credits, no explanation, just darkness. And then the file closed itself. I sat frozen, hands hovering over the keyboard. The air in the room felt heavier now, charged somehow, like something had shifted. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of prank, a trick file. But how would anyone have put it on my laptop without me noticing? Unless the feed I saw on that basement monitor wasn't just a security camera. What if it had been a direct connection? What if someone was on the other end, watching me, tracking my every move? I reached out to delete the file, but it was already gone, erased, nothing in the trash folder, nothing in recent activity, like it had never existed. And maybe it hadn't. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mind was running wild from everything I'd seen. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was very wrong in that house. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I didn't go back downstairs. I didn't open any more files. I sat on the couch, waiting, watching the clock until I heard the familiar sound of the front door unlocking. Mr. Baker stepped in, briefcase in hand, tie loosened. Same calm, polite smile. "Everything go okay?" he asked, setting his keys on the counter. I swallowed, nodded. Yeah, Lily's asleep. Everything's fine. He smiled again. Appreciate it, as always. There was nothing suspicious in his tone, nothing in his expression that gave away the existence of that hidden room, that video, that file. I grabbed my bag and stepped out into the night, heart still pounding. The cool air hit me like a wave of reality. The quiet street, the perfect lawns, the distant hum of someone's sprinkler system. It was all too normal, too clean, and I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, or what I hadn't. The next morning I woke up still unsettled. I kept going over everything in my mind, the photos, the files, the woman in the video, and Lily, her life cataloged in that folder like she was being studied, not raised. Part of me wanted to go to the police, but what would I even say? That I opened a secret door in a house that didn't belong to me? That a ghost file showed me a silent warning? No one would believe me. So I did something else. I started digging. First online, searching for anything I could find about the Bakers, old news articles, public records, social media posts. It wasn't much. Mr. Baker had a very limited digital footprint. A LinkedIn profile with almost no connections. A few mentions on corporate websites, nothing personal, nothing emotional. Mrs. Baker was a little more open. Photos of Lily on Facebook, family vacations, birthday cakes, Halloween costumes, but even those started to feel curated, too perfect, like a portfolio, not a life. And then I found something strange, a post from 3 years ago, a photo of Lily, much younger, sitting in a park, smiling. The caption read, "First day with our sweet girl." First day? It wasn't her birthday, and when I read the comments, my stomach turned. Someone had replied, "Congratulations! You're going to be amazing foster parents." Foster, but Lily's last name was Baker, just like theirs. I checked again, searched more. The adoption was never mentioned again, not in any other post, not in any article, just that one fleeting comment. And suddenly, everything took on a new meaning. What if Lily wasn't their biological daughter? What if they didn't adopt her out of kindness? What if she was part of something else? There's a line we all draw in our minds between what we should do and what we actually do. In the days after that night at the baker's house, I tried to keep that line firm. I told myself to let it go, that it wasn't my business, that I didn't belong in someone else's secrets, but that line blurred more each day. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, frame by frame, the hidden door, the video file, the red circles around strangers' faces, and most of all, that folder on Lily. The way it had been assembled, so cold, so clinical. I started to feel like I was part of something I didn't understand, a player in a game I hadn't agreed to join, and eventually I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to go back, not during a babysitting shift, not as a guest. I had a key. They'd given it to me weeks ago, just in case I ever needed to let myself in. I had never used it without permission. Until now. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I knew the Bakers wouldn't be home. Mrs. Baker had mentioned a doctor's appointment in the city, and Mr. Baker rarely came home before 7. I waited until the street was quiet. No dog walkers, no joggers, just the hum of distant lawn mowers and the occasional bird call. I parked down the block and walked to the house. Heart pounding, I slipped the key into the lock. The door opened with a soft click. Inside, everything looked exactly as I remembered it. Too perfect, too clean, like it had been staged for a magazine shoot. I moved quickly, shutting the door behind me, locking it. Every step felt like it echoed too loudly. I didn't bother pretending I was there for anything else. I went straight to the basement, down the familiar stairs, past the pool table, toward the far corner. The bookshelf was still in place, still hiding its secret. I found the indentation, pressed it. The soft click echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The shelf swung open. The door behind it hadn't changed. Still slightly ajar, still humming faintly with that same mechanical whisper. I pushed it open. The room was just as I'd left it, cold. Dimensions still humming, but something was different. There were more files now. The desk, once tidy, was cluttered with papers, handwritten notes, newspaper clippings, photos, and a new corkboard. This one wasn't full of strangers. It was full of me. Photos of me walking to campus, sitting in a coffee shop, reading in the park, babysitting Lily. Some of them were recent. One I recognized. It had been taken just 2 days ago. I felt sick. Someone had been watching me, recording me, studying me. I moved to the desk, hands shaking, flipped through the files. There was one with my name on it. Inside, everything, my full name, my school, my class schedule, the names of my parents, their address, my roommate's name, my bank account number. I backed away. My legs nearly gave out. And then I saw something even worse, a document dated just 1 day prior. At the top it read, Subject Shift Recommendation, Phase 2, Clearance Pending. Underneath was a checklist. Surveillance complete, emotional conditioning in progress, isolation, relocation, integration. I stared at the words, unable to make sense of them. What did they mean by conditioning, isolation, relocation? I was no longer just watching something. I was part of it. I turned back to the computer, driven by something between fear and desperation. The screen was on. A program was running. No camera feeds this time. Just code. Lines of it, streaming like a digital waterfall, and in the corner, a countdown. 001342. It was ticking down second by second. What was going to happen when it reached 0? I didn't know, but I knew I didn't want to be there to find out. I turned to leave, only to freeze. There was a sound behind me. Footsteps. Someone was in the house. I couldn't breathe. The text from the unknown number burned in my mind. Enjoy your little exploration last night. Let's talk. Come to the house at 2 p.m. Come alone, or things will get unpleasant for you and your family. How did they know? Had I been caught on camera in that hidden room? Had I left something behind, some trace of my presence that they could use to find me, or worse? Was I being watched even now? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on me. The Bakers. Mr. Baker. They weren't just a family, they were something else entirely. I glanced at the clock again. 10 a.m. 4 hours. 4 hours until I had to face whatever was waiting for me at that house. 4 hours to decide what to do next. The room felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, and my heart raced as I sat there staring at my phone. My mind was spinning in a dozen different directions, each more horrifying than the last. I could run. I could pack a bag and leave, head to the nearest bus station, get as far away as possible. But what about my family? The text had made it clear. This wasn't just about me. This was about everyone I loved. They knew who I was. They knew my family. What could I do? I was just a college student, a babysitter. I didn't have any power, any resources. And yet, here I was, caught in a situation that felt bigger than anything I could handle. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? How could I prove any of this? I didn't have any concrete evidence, nothing they could take seriously. Who would believe me? I was stuck. And the clock was ticking down. At 1:30 p.m., I got in my car. I didn't know what else to do. The cool air outside hit me like a slap in the face. I tried to calm my breathing to steady my nerves, but every part of me wanted to turn around, to drive away and never look back. I drove toward the baker's house, feeling like I was being drawn into some kind of trap. And yet, somehow, I had to know the truth. I had to understand what was really going on. The closer I got, the more my palms sweat. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car tailing me, but the street was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. By the time I reached the house, I was shaking. I parked down the street just like the first time, took a deep breath, and walked toward the door. The house seemed quieter now. There was no sign of movement, no car in the driveway, but something about it felt off. It felt too still. I let myself in with the key. The door creaked as it opened, the sound like a warning. Everything was exactly how I remembered it. Too perfect, too pristine. No sign of the chaos I had uncovered. I made my way toward the basement, my heart pounding with every step. But just before I reached the stairs, I stopped. There was something different now. The air smelled wrong. Not musty or stale, but something colder, something sterile. I hesitated. Then I pushed forward. I reached the basement door, hand trembling as I placed it on the handle. The door clicked open, and I froze. The hidden room was gone. The bookshelf had been moved. The door that had once been hidden behind it was now wide open. The room beyond was empty. No monitors, no photos, no files. The desk was gone. I couldn't move. The basement was silent now. Except for the soft creak of the door behind me, I could hear the footsteps clearly now. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. They were here. I tried to steady my breathing, but it came in shallow gasps, betraying my panic. Every instinct told me to run, to bolt from the house and never look back. But my legs felt like lead. I was frozen. The footsteps stopped just outside the basement door. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the stillness of the house, the heavy silence that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, "Are you here?" The voice, Mr. Baker's voice, sounded different this time, calmer, colder, like he already knew I was here. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The door creaked open. Footsteps entered the basement, slow and careful. I could hear his breath now, steady, as he walked closer to where I was hidden. I could feel the tension building in the air, thick and suffocating. What did he want? Why hadn't he just come for me already? I held my breath, praying that he wouldn't find me, but I knew it was only a matter of time. The seconds felt like hours. I listened, my body tense, every nerve firing. Mr. Baker's shadow stretched across the floor as he passed by the couch, just inches away from where I was hiding. I dared not make a sound, dared not move a muscle. His footsteps faded toward the back of the room. I risked a glance, just enough to see him walk past the open door of the hidden room. The room was still empty, the monitors, the photographs, gone. He seemed to linger there for a moment, staring into the empty space. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward the stairs. I let out the breath I didn't even realize I was holding. But I didn't dare move, not yet, not until I was sure he was gone. It felt like an eternity before I heard the door close above me. The house grew still again. I waited, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The silence stretched on, but my heart was still pounding in my chest. He had left. For now. I stood up, my body stiff from being crouched behind the couch for so long. I didn't know what to do. What was happening? Why had he been in the basement? Had he known I was there the whole time? But the questions didn't matter anymore. I was running out of time. I glanced at my phone. It was 1:55 p.m., 5 minutes until I was supposed to meet him. I had to make a decision. I had to act. But what was the right move? I couldn't just walk into that house again, not after everything I had seen. But I couldn't run either, not without putting my family at risk. I had no choice. I had to go. With trembling hands, I left the basement, moving quickly and quietly like a shadow through the house. I couldn't risk another encounter with Mr. Baker. If he was still around, I would have to confront him. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I reached the front door and paused. The house was so quiet now. Too quiet. I couldn't get the image of Mr. Baker standing there, watching me, out of my mind. As I drove, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My thoughts were a blur, too fast, too chaotic to keep up with. What was Mr. Baker involved in? The hidden room, the surveillance photos, the cryptic documents. None of it made sense. And yet, there it was, undeniable proof that the Bakers were hiding something. Something dark. And then, the text, the warning. Enjoy your little exploration last night. Let's talk. Come to the house at 2 p.m. Come alone, or things will get unpleasant for you and your family. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Had they been watching me the whole time? Had I been followed? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted, like a rabbit in a cage. I wasn't sure if I was more terrified of the Bakers or what might be waiting for me when I returned to the house. I parked a few blocks away, far enough to be out of sight, but close enough to make a quick escape if I needed to. The house was eerily quiet, just like before. Too quiet. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the front door, trying to gather my courage. What had I gotten myself into? The text had said to come alone. But if I was being honest with myself, I didn't know if I could trust anyone at this point. Even the police? Who would believe me? What evidence did I have? I was just a college student, a babysitter caught in a web I didn't understand. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and rang the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately. Mrs. Baker stood there smiling as if nothing had happened. "Hi, how are you?" she asked, her voice as cheerful as ever, but there was something in her eyes, a glint of something I couldn't quite place. Did she know? "I'm fine," I said, forcing the words out. I got your message," I added. Her smile never faltered. "Good," she said. "Come on in." I stepped inside, trying to keep my composure, but every part of me screamed to turn around, to leave, to run as far as I could, but I couldn't. Not now. "Mr. Baker's in the living room," Mrs. Baker said, leading me toward the back of the house. I could hear their voices, Mr. Baker's, low and calm, but there was something in his tone now, something different, cold, dangerous. As I entered the room, Mr. Baker stood up from the couch. His expression was unreadable. "Good to see you again," he said. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like he was trying to put me at ease, but I could hear the underlying tension. I nodded, but I could feel the unease rising in my chest. "You've been doing some exploring," Mr. Baker continued, his eyes never leaving mine. I froze. Had he known? How much did he know? I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice sounding too weak, too shaky to be convincing. Mr. Baker didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the side of the room, where a large bookshelf stood. He casually brushed his hand along the edge, his back to me. It was as if he didn't see me as a threat at all, and that made me more terrified than anything else. "I think you do," he said, his voice carrying a tone I didn't like. His words sent a chill down my spine. I knew he was playing some game, but I didn't know the rules. I couldn't figure out what was going on or how to get out of it. Mrs. Baker entered the room, holding a tray of drinks. She smiled again, but her eyes were cold, calculating. "Here, have some water," she said, offering the glass. I took it, though my hand trembled as I held it. The doorbell rang again, louder this time, cutting through the tense silence that hung heavy in the room. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, a frantic thud that threatened to give me away. Who was at the door? I had no idea. But as I looked at Mr. and Mrs. Baker, I could see something flicker in their eyes, something that told me this wasn't just a casual visit. This wasn't a neighbor or a delivery. This was something else, something that would change everything. Mrs. Baker placed the tray of drinks down with an almost unnatural calm, her smile faltering for just a split second. "Excuse me," she said, her voice betraying none of the tension I could feel growing in the room. She walked to the door, but I didn't miss the way her hand brushed the edge of her coat as if she were reaching for something hidden. I held my breath. This was it. Whatever was about to happen, I couldn't back out now. As Mrs. Baker opened the door, the flood of cold air hit me, carrying the scent of rain from outside. I couldn't see who was at the threshold, only the shadow of a figure standing just beyond it. But I could feel the change in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the door opening. It was the arrival of something or someone that would push this already precarious situation over the edge. "Mr. Edwards," Mrs. Baker greeted the newcomer, her voice syrupy sweet. The man at the door stepped inside, and I instantly recognized him. He was one of the men in the photographs, a sharp-dressed businessman with cold eyes. He was the one shaking hands with Mr. Baker in that photo, the one whose face I'd seen in the news, the man arrested for fraud and money laundering. I could feel the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just some family secret. This was far bigger than I had imagined. Mr. Baker stood, his eyes never leaving Mr. Edwards. "Good to see you," Mr. Baker said, his voice a bit too smooth. He gestured for Mr. Edwards to sit, but the man didn't move. Instead, he turned his cold gaze toward me. "And who is this?" he asked, his voice low and curious. I froze. How much did he know? "Just the babysitter," Mrs. Baker replied, her tone dismissive as though I was just a minor detail. But Mr. Edwards didn't look convinced. He took a step toward me. His eyes scrutinized me in a way that made my skin crawl. Did he know? I forced myself to speak. I think I should go," I stammered, my heart hammering in my chest. I was about to make a run for it, but something held me in place. I couldn't leave, not yet, not when everything was about to unravel. Mr. Edwards smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they know they've caught you in a lie, or when they have all the power. "We'll get to that in a moment," he said. Then he turned toward the Bakers, his expression hardening. "I trust you've informed her of the situation." The Bakers exchanged a quick, knowing glance, and suddenly everything shifted. This wasn't just a casual meeting. This wasn't about a simple babysitter walking in on a family secret. This was a power play, a warning. Mr. Baker cleared his throat and turned to face me fully. "Actually," he began, his voice colder now, "we were just about to discuss what you've discovered." His eyes locked onto mine, his gaze sharp. "Curiosity," he continued, "can be a dangerous thing." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. I didn't know where this was going, but I knew it wasn't going to end well. For me. "I'm sure you have questions," Mrs. Baker said, her tone now tinged with something darker, something more threatening. "But before you get any ideas about running off to the police, I want you to understand something." I didn't like where this was headed. Her words were measured, calculated. There was no kindness in her eyes any more. It was as if she had dropped the act entirely, and what remained was someone much colder, someone capable of anything. Mr. Edwards leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "We don't want trouble," he said, his voice low and menacing. "We simply need to make sure that what you've seen, what you've learned, doesn't get out. And you'll cooperate, won't you?" The eerie quiet of the woods was broken by a chilling laugh, echoing through the trees like a predator's call. A voice, rough and mocking, whispered from behind a rock. I clenched my fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I couldn't stay hidden forever. If I ran now, they'd catch me before I even got a step. I had no choice but to act. My gaze fell upon the mutilated body of the elk, its lifeless form discarded in the center of the clearing. It was gruesome, but in that moment it sparked a dangerous idea. I could use it. It wasn't ideal, but if I played my cards right, it might just buy me enough time. I carefully shed my jacket and began stuffing it with leaves, branches, and anything I could find in the underbrush. It wasn't a perfect disguise, but in the darkness, it could pass for a human figure. I needed to make them think I was surrendering. Slowly, I stood up, lifting the makeshift dummy above the rock, then called out, my voice trembling slightly, "All right, I'm coming out. Don't shoot." The rustling behind me grew louder as the poachers prepared. The tension in the air was thick, my every muscle screaming for action. They were expecting me to emerge, but instead I tossed the jacket aside with all my might, sending it sailing into the shadows. Shots rang out, loud, frantic. The men had fallen for it. In that instant, I bolted. I was faster than I'd ever been, my feet barely touching the ground as I made a run for the elk's carcass. Bullets whizzed past, but the dead animal gave me cover. My heart pounded in my chest as I took cover behind the body, the scent of decay overwhelming my senses. The poachers, realizing their mistake, started closing in, but I was ready. I aimed my weapon at the elk's bloated stomach, pulled the trigger, and watched as the stomach burst open, a sickening stench filling the air. The men recoiled in horror, their faces contorted in disgust. Seizing the opportunity, I sprinted toward the tree line, tearing through the underbrush. The cold night air stung my skin, and my legs burned with the effort, but I couldn't stop. I had to make it to the road. My Jeep was waiting for me. It felt like an eternity before I broke through the trees, my eyes locked on the familiar sight of my Jeep parked on the dirt road. I was almost there when, bam! The sharp crack of a gunshot split the air, and pain exploded in my left arm. I stumbled, blood pouring down my sleeve as I fell to my knees. I turned and saw him, The bearded man, his rifle aimed at me, a sadistic smile playing across his face. "You think you're getting away?" he sneered. I gritted my teeth, fighting the fog of pain. "No," I managed, "but you are." Confusion flashed across his face for a moment, and then he heard it. The faint sound of sirens in the distance. "Back up!" I seized the moment, charging at him with what little strength I had left, tackling him to the ground. The rifle slipped from his hands as we struggled in the dirt. His weight heavy on me, but adrenaline coursing through my veins gave me strength. I wrestled him for control, and with a final effort, I brought the rifle down across his head. He went limp beneath me. Panting, I stumbled to my feet, gripping the rifle with my uninjured hand. In the distance, flashing lights grew brighter, the sound of sirens becoming deafening. Help was finally here. The next few hours were a blur. The remaining poachers were rounded up. My arm was treated. I answered questions, told my story 1,000 times over, but I barely heard the words coming from my mouth. By the time the sun rose, I stood there in the quiet aftermath, the world around me still and uncertain. The adrenaline was slowly wearing off, leaving me with a deep exhaustion that felt like it had settled into my bones. Despite the chaos of the last few hours, the forest, this place I'd known so well, felt different now. It wasn't just the physical toll that was weighing on me, but something darker, something that gnawed at me beneath the surface. My boss's words echoed in my head, the praise, the acknowledgement, but there was no sense of victory, no satisfaction in my chest. I'd done my job, yes, but at what cost? The men I'd taken down weren't just poachers. They were part of something far bigger, and I knew that my small part in this was barely the tip of the iceberg. As much as I wanted to believe that it was all over, a nagging feeling told me it wasn't. Not really. I watched the sunrise slowly, the sky turning from gray to fiery orange, as if the world itself was trying to shake off the night's darkness. I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in thought, but eventually I snapped out of it, the weight of the situation hitting me all at once. I needed to leave. I needed time to think. My Jeep had been thoroughly examined, my gear was checked, and the investigation was underway. The crime scene had been cleared, and the authorities were already combing the area for any more clues that would link this operation to the larger network of criminals. The poachers' vehicles were being towed, and the bodies of the elk and other animals were being taken for a forensic examination. My role in all of it was done, but my mind kept circling back to one thing. The poaching ring wasn't just about animals. They had been using the park as a cover for something far more insidious. I'd seen the photos, heard the whispers of the local rangers and officers, but no one had been able to connect the dots until now. I'd broken the case wide open, yes, but that didn't make me feel like a hero. It made me feel like I was standing on the edge of something far worse. I needed answers, and not just for the animals, but for myself. How deep did this go? With my arm bandaged up, the pain beginning to throb in time with my heartbeat, I walked away from the scene, my boots crunching on the gravel. I could feel the weight of the night in every step, and though I was physically exhausted, my mind was wide awake, alert. I wasn't going to let it go. Not like this. I wasn't going to be another bystander, just another guy who did his job and went home. This was bigger. I could feel it. I decided then that I wasn't going to sit back and wait for someone else to solve this. I needed to dig deeper, get to the heart of it. I had to understand who was behind this, why they were operating out of Whispering Pines, and what they stood to gain. As I reached my Jeep, I pulled out my phone, staring at the cracked screen as if it held the answers I was looking for. There was nothing about the poaching ring on the news, nothing about any of the arrests. It was as if the whole operation was being covered up. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe the authorities were keeping it under wraps. But I had a sinking feeling that there was more going on than just what I'd seen. I had to make some calls. As the miles stretched out behind me, the unease in my chest didn't fade. The lights of the city were barely a distant glow now, and the quiet of the road felt suffocating. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, my mind cycling through the same thoughts again and again. The poaching ring was just the beginning. There was something more sinister at play here. It wasn't just about animals being slaughtered. This had the hallmarks of something far more organized, far more dangerous. I could still hear the crunch of leaves underfoot, the smell of the elk carcass lingering in my nostrils as I replayed every moment in that clearing. The poachers weren't acting on their own. They had backing. They had resources. I hadn't just taken down a group of criminals. I had stumbled onto something much darker. It had been hours since the sirens first wailed through the forest, the sound now a haunting echo in my ears. My arm ached, the pain of the gunshot wound pulsing with every bump in the road. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the gnawing feeling in my gut. I needed to know what I was up against. I needed to know who was behind this. I thought about calling my boss, but something held me back. If they were part of the operation, if they had any involvement, then I couldn't trust them. It was a gut instinct, one I couldn't shake, no matter how much I wanted to believe they were on my side. I pulled into a gas station off the main road, the flickering fluorescent lights casting a sickly glow on everything. As I stepped out of the Jeep, I glanced over my shoulder, making sure no one had followed me. It was a habit I hadn't needed until now, but one I couldn't ignore. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, a cold wave of paranoia washing over me. I wasn't just being cautious anymore. I was actively fearing for my life. Inside the gas station, I grabbed a coffee, forcing myself to take slow, deep breaths. The small-town feel of the place should have been comforting, but it only added to the tension. The cashier smiled politely at me, but it felt hollow, almost staged. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet, a little too rehearsed. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just been a long night." Her smile faltered for just a second before she nodded. I paid for the coffee and left without another word, the nagging feeling that something was off refusing to let me go. Back in the Jeep, I pulled out my phone, but before I could dial anyone, my screen lit up with a new message. It was from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, a sense of dread sinking into my stomach. "Hope you enjoyed your little adventure in the woods. It won't be your last. We're just getting started. See you soon, Ranger." My pulse quickened, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't need to be told what it meant. The threat was clear. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to let me walk away. They were watching me. They were always watching. I slammed the phone down on the passenger seat, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't just run. I couldn't hide. I had to see this through, no matter how deep it went, no matter how dangerous it got. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. The sky was dark, but the road felt even darker as I drove farther into the night. The weight of the message sat heavy in my chest, pressing on me like a physical burden. I was no longer a park ranger. I was a target. The poachers had been the first domino to fall, but now I was caught in a much bigger game. Whatever these people were involved in, it was bigger than I had ever imagined, and I was stuck right in the middle of it. I thought about stopping at a hotel, maybe finding some peace, but that was out of the question, not with this looming over me. I had no idea who was watching, who knew where I was, or who was involved in this mess. I needed information. I needed to figure out what I had stumbled into, and I pulled up next to the building and killed the engine. The night was completely still. I stepped out of the Jeep, wincing as my injured arm brushed against the doorframe. The bullet wound had already started to heal, but it was far from comfortable. I could still feel the tug of pain with every movement, but I pushed through it. It was nothing compared to what was coming. I made my way inside the facility, my footsteps echoing off the cold concrete floor. There were shelves of old supplies, remnants of the park's past, but nothing that would help me now. I dug through boxes of dusty paperwork, hoping to find anything that could give me a lead on who the poachers had been working for. Nothing. Frustration began to mount. I slammed the lid of a box shut and turned to leave when something caught my eye. It was a small folder tucked away in a corner. I walked over and pulled it out, flipping it open to reveal a set of photographs. The first photo was blurry, but the figures in the image were unmistakable. It was the bearded man, the one who had nearly shot me, standing alongside a man in a dark suit. The two were shaking hands, but what really stood out was the dark, sleek car parked in the background. The symbol on the side of the car was faint, but I recognized it instantly. It was the logo of a private security firm, one that had been under investigation for illegal arms dealings. I froze. This was it. These weren't just poachers. They were connected to something far more dangerous, something bigger than I had realized. I quickly flipped through the rest of the folder, my pulse quickening as I saw more photos. The bearded man at an airport, the man in the suit attending a gala, and finally, a photograph of the two of them standing in front of a building I recognized, the same one I had driven past earlier that evening, where I'd seen the mysterious private security vehicles. The pieces were starting to come together, but it didn't make sense. How did this connect to the poaching? What did they want with me? The screech of tires outside snapped me out of my thoughts. Someone was here. I ducked behind a stack of crates, holding my breath. Through a crack in the wall, I could just make out the headlights of a car pulling into the lot. The engine cut off, and the sound of doors slamming shut echoed through the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the danger had just escalated. They were here, and they knew I was onto them. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay calm. There was no time to waste. I had to act now. My mind raced as I scanned the room, looking for anything that could be used as a weapon, a tool to defend myself. The cold metal of an old crowbar caught my eye, and I grabbed it, holding it tightly in my good hand. I heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They knew I was here. They were toying with me. Jack, A voice called out from the darkness. It was the bearded man. My stomach dropped. You've made this difficult, but we're not going to let you leave now. I tightened my grip on the crowbar. This was it. There was no more running. I had to fight. The man's shadow fell across the doorway, and I prepared myself. As soon as he stepped inside, I would strike. But then, unexpectedly, another voice cut through the silence. "Hold up," a woman's voice said sharply. "We need him alive." There was a pause, and then the bearded man grunted. "Fine, but no more games. He's seen too much." I didn't wait to hear any more. The moment he stepped into the open, I lunged forward, swinging the crowbar with all the strength I had. The metal connected with his arm with a sickening crack, and he staggered back, yelling in pain. I skidded to a stop, breath steaming in the cold air. The figure in the tactical vest raised a hand, not to shoot, but to signal someone behind them. Another pair of boots crunched on gravel. I was boxed in, two armed figures closing in, and the only cover around me was a rusted-out utility trailer. I raised the rifle, heart hammering, but I knew I wouldn't get both of them. Maybe not even one. My only chance was to stall. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, voice rough with panic and exhaustion. The woman stepped forward into the light of the Jeep's headlights. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, sharp eyes, cropped hair, and the kind of confidence that came from years of authority. Her voice was steady, practiced. "We're not here to kill you, Jack," she said. "If we wanted that, it would have happened already." "You shot me," I growled, blood still soaking through my sleeve. "That was him," she replied, nodding toward the bearded man still groaning in the doorway. "He's a liability even to us. I told him to bring you in, not take you out." I kept the rifle trained on her, uncertain whether to believe a word of it. "Who are you?" She exhaled slowly. "Let's just say I'm with a group that doesn't exactly show up in public records. The kind of people who fix problems quietly. And you, Jack, you've stumbled into a very noisy problem." "That poaching ring?" I asked. "They weren't just hunting elk." She gave a slight nod. "Number, the elk were the cover. What they were really trafficking is far worse. Weapons, materials, personnel. You saw the security firm's emblem on that car for a reason." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You knew about this? And let it happen?" "We were tracking it," she said, "from the inside. And then you came along and blew it wide open. We've been trying to trace the supply chain for months. You just gave them a reason to scatter." "I was doing my job," I snapped. "And now it's our job to clean up," she replied coldly, "but we need your help." I shook my head slowly. "Number, you're insane if you think I'll work with you." "You don't have much of a choice," she said, stepping closer. "They know your name, your face, your habits. You're already in this, whether you like it or not. But we can give you protection and a way to hit back." I glanced between her and the other figure. The weight of everything hit me all at once. The gun in my hand felt heavier than before. The adrenaline was burning off fast, leaving behind the raw ache of pain, exhaustion, and dread. "Why me?" I asked quietly. "Because you survived," she said simply, "and because you've proven you're not easy to kill." A long silence stretched between us. Then finally, I lowered the rifle. "Fine," I said, "but I want answers. Real ones." "You'll get them," she said, and gestured for the other figure to stand down. "But not here. We need to move." As I climbed into the back of their armored SUV, the adrenaline finally gave way to something else. resolve. I didn't know exactly what I'd stepped into, but I was done being a pawn. If they wanted my help, they were going to get more than they bargained for. And if this organization thought I'd play nice, they were in for a surprise. The SUV rolled down the winding forest road, tires crunching over loose gravel. I sat in the back seat, cradling my injured arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage that barely slowed the bleeding. The woman sat beside me, silent for most of the ride. The man up front, still masked and stoic, drove with the quiet efficiency of someone used to being invisible. Finally, after miles of silence, I spoke. "So what's your name? Or do I just call you Mysterious Government Lady?" She smirked faintly. "Sarah. Just Sarah for now." "Okay, Sarah. Mind telling me where we're going?" "To a safe house. Somewhere no one's going to find you or us." "And then what?" She turned to me, her expression serious now. "Then we show you what this really is, what they're really after, and why we've been trying to stop them for over a year." I leaned my head back, letting the rhythmic motion of the vehicle lull me into a half-daze. My arm throbbed with each heartbeat. My mind kept looping over everything, the ambush, the chase, the explosion of the elk carcass, and that final standoff. It felt like a fever dream. Eventually, the SUV pulled off the main road and rumbled down an overgrown path. Trees thickened on either side until we reached a small clearing where we descended into darkness, fluorescent lights flickering on as the elevator settled. The space beneath was a stark contrast to the wilderness above. Steel walls, computer banks, weapons lockers. It looked like a miniature military outpost built underground. A man in a lab coat met us at the door. "We need to get that arm cleaned up now." Sarah nodded to him. "Take him to Med Bay 2. I'll join you in 10. As the medic led me down the hallway, I caught glimpses of rooms filled with satellite images, pinned maps, and racks of surveillance equipment. This wasn't a ragtag crew. Whoever Sarah worked for, they had serious backing. I sat on a cot while the medic worked quickly, cleaning the wound, stitching me up, and hooking me to a saline drip. My body was running on fumes. I wanted to sleep for a week. But just as my eyes began to droop, Sarah walked in. She dropped a file folder onto my lap. "Here's your first look." I opened it and was greeted by grainy photos, poachers huddled around crates marked with Cyrillic letters, night vision shots of helicopters offloading equipment, maps with red pins stretching across the northern border. "What is this?" I asked. "An extraction route," she said. "They're not just smuggling guns, they're smuggling people. Ex-military, wanted criminals, off-the-grid types who disappear into our woods and come out with new identities. And that guy tonight? Just a courier, a loud, violent one, but he was supposed to hand off a hard drive to the next link in the chain. You stop that." I looked up at her. "So what now?" Sarah crossed her arms. "Now we hunt. Together. You know the terrain better than any of us. We've got intel and resources. If we work together, we might just be able to dismantle this before it reaches the wrong hands." I stared at the photos again. The weight of the moment sank in. "I'm in," I said, and just like that, the hunt began anew. Only this time, I wasn't just running through the woods. I was running straight into the heart of something much bigger than I'd ever imagined. The basement doors creaked shut behind us, swallowing the three of us in a suffocating hush, broken only by the hum of ancient fluorescent lights overhead. I swallowed hard, trying not to show how terrified I was. Samantha's heels clicked against the tile as she led the way through the narrow corridor, the hulking orderly close behind me, his silence more unnerving than any threat she could have made. "This won't take long," she said over her shoulder, her tone breezy, but her eyes cold as ice. We stopped outside the old storage room. Samantha unlocked the door with a key from her lanyard and pushed it open. The smell hit me first, stale chemicals and something else, something metallic and sour. I hesitated on the threshold. "In?" she ordered. I stepped inside, the orderly following, his bulk blocking the exit. My heart pounded. There was nothing in the room but stacked boxes, an old gurney, and a metal chair bolted to the floor. The second the door shut, I knew I wouldn't be walking out on my own. Samantha circled me slowly. "You weren't supposed to see what you saw, Mike," she said, as if this were all just an unfortunate misunderstanding. "But now we've got a situation, one that needs cleaning up." "You don't have to do this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I haven't told anyone, I swear yet," she replied, eyes narrowing. "But you will. They always do." The orderly cracked his knuckles. I backed away, my hands up. "Listen, I'm just a janitor. I don't matter. I just want to do my job and go home." Samantha tilted her head. "And I just want to keep mine. So let's make sure neither of us has a reason to talk." She pulled out a syringe from her pocket, filled with something milky and viscous. My stomach turned. Panic seized me, and before I could think, I grabbed the nearest box and hurled it toward her. She stumbled, the syringe slipping from her hand. I ducked as the orderly lunged, sidestepping him in a blind rush. My shoulder, within minutes, alarms were blaring through the hospital. Nurses looked up from their stations, confused. Orderlies scrambled, and somewhere below, Samantha and her silent partner were probably realizing their plan had just fallen apart. They caught the orderly first, dragging him out of the stairwell with his hands cuffed behind his back. It took longer to find Samantha. She'd slipped out during the chaos, leaving behind her badge, her keys, and the syringe I'd knocked from her hand. The rest of the morning was a blur. Interviews with hospital admin, statements to the police, an ambulance ride to check me for injuries. Through it all, I kept thinking I was supposed to mop floors, not uncover a criminal ring. When dawn finally broke, washing the city in pale light, I sat on the curb outside the ER, wrapped in a blanket, my nerves still shot. Dr. Patel came over, kneeling beside me. "You did the right thing, Mike," he said. "You probably saved lives tonight." I nodded numbly. "I just wanted to clean the floors." He smiled faintly. "And instead, you cleaned house." The next few days passed in a haze of police reports, HR meetings, and awkward pats on the back from hospital staff who had never even bothered to learn my name before. Suddenly, I was that guy, the janitor, who took down a dirty nurse and her dealer friend, a local hero. They even offered to move me to day shift. I should have been relieved. Instead, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because something didn't add up. Samantha had vanished without a trace. Security footage showed her exiting the stairwell, and then nothing. It was like she'd walked into thin air. The orderly, whose name turned out to be Kyle Brandt, lawyered up fast and refused to talk. And the vials? Hospital pharmacy said they were narcotics, but the label didn't match anything in the current inventory. Late one night, I found myself back in that same basement corridor. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was technically on leave, but I had swiped a master key before HR could make me turn in my badge. I unlocked the storage room again. The boxes were gone now, cleared out for the investigation, but the smell still lingered, that faint metallic tang, almost like rusted iron or old blood. My eyes scanned the walls, the vents, the ceiling tiles. Something told me there was more here than what the police had found. Then I saw it, a faint groove in the tile near the gurney. I knelt and ran my fingers along it. It wasn't just a scuff mark, it was a seam. Heart pounding, I wedged a screwdriver into the crack and pried upward. The tile gave way with a soft pop. Beneath it was a shallow compartment, no deeper than a shoebox, and inside a notebook. It was leather-bound and old, the pages yellowed and stained. I flipped it open and squinted at the handwriting. It wasn't Samantha's. It wasn't anyone's I recognized. But the contents made my blood run cold. March 3rd, 1987. Subject 14, unresponsive after injection. Transferred to Ward C, no signs of stabilization. Recommending disposal protocol. April 12th, 1987. Vial X3 has been stabilized. Recommend further testing on non-registered patients to avoid incident repetition. It went on like that. Dates, test subjects, references to floors and rooms that didn't exist anymore, and over again. One name, Dr. L. Redgrave. I flipped to the final page. One line stood out, written in red ink. The vault must remain sealed. Vault? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My brain kept looping the phrase, the vault must remain sealed. The notebook wasn't some nurse's scribbled thoughts. This was research, clinical, institutional, and I had a feeling Samantha wasn't stealing street drugs. She was stealing something else. I explained my plan quickly, keeping my voice low and my words precise. Every second counted, and one wrong move could be the end for all of us. Tom nodded, his jaw clenched. Say when. I twisted my ankle slightly, feeling the familiar bulk of the knife hidden in my sock. Still there. Good. I shifted my weight subtly, trying to inch my bound hands closer to it without drawing attention. Outside the tent, the guards chatted idly, their voices drifting in and out like ghosts. One of them was laughing. Some changes with Tom and Sarah. Listen me carefully. Tom and Sarah exchanged a glance, their fear hardening into determination. Without warning, Sarah began screaming, thrashing wildly against her restraints. "Help! I can't breathe!" she cried. We heard a string of curses from outside before the tent flap was yanked open and one of the men poked his head in. "Shut up in there!" he barked. Tom jumped in, his voice urgent. "Please, she's having a panic attack. She needs air." The man hesitated, clearly torn. While he was distracted, I forced myself to move, ignoring the pain as I managed to slip the knife from my sock into my tied hands. Just as he reached for his radio, I cut myself free. In one swift movement, I lunged at him, catching him completely off guard. We tumbled to the ground in a mess of limbs, and I heard a sickening crack as his head struck a rock. He went limp, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was dead. But a faint groan told me he was still alive, just unconscious. I didn't waste a second. I slashed through Tom and Sarah's bindings, and we scrambled to arm ourselves, grabbing rocks, broken branches, anything we could find. Pitiful weapons against guns, but it was all we had. Cautiously, we slipped out of the tent. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure it would give us away. The second guard was nearby, his back to us as he relieved himself against a tree. It was now or never. Tom moved first, slamming a heavy branch into the man's head. He dropped without making a sound. "We have to find Jake," Sarah whispered frantically. I nodded, but reality hit me hard. We needed help. "We have to get to the road. We need a phone. We can't fight them all," I said. Torn between rescuing our friend and surviving, we made the hardest choice of our lives. We ran. The forest was pitch black, branches tearing at our skin as we stumbled through the underbrush. Every crack of a twig sounded like a gunshot, every shadow a threat. But we kept moving, fueled by pure terror and the need to survive. After what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only minutes, we burst out onto a deserted dirt road. Headlights glimmered in the distance. We waved our arms and screamed at the top of our lungs, "Stop! Help us!" The car screeched to a stop, and an elderly couple leaned out, wide-eyed. We must have looked insane, filthy, bleeding, and wild with fear. "Please," I gasped, "we need help. Men with guns. Call the police." The next few hours blurred together. Police swarmed the forest. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Paramedics checked us over, and they wrapped us in blankets and gave us hot coffee. As the sun rose, bathing the sky in pink and gold, a police officer approached us with news. They had raided the camp, arrested several suspects, and, most importantly, found Jake. He was shaken, but unharmed. Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. In the days that followed, the full story unfolded. The men were part of a weapon smuggling ring, using the remote forest as a drop-off point. Our little campsite had been right in the middle of their operation. The media called us heroes for helping bring them down. But honestly, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt lucky to be alive, lucky my friends were safe, lucky that our weekend trip hadn't turned into our last adventure. As I sit here telling this story, I'm reminded how fast life can change. One moment, you're roasting marshmallows with your friends. The next, you're running for your life through a dark, endless forest. But I also learned something. Strength isn't about being the biggest or the smartest. Sometimes it's just about refusing to give up, even when everything seems lost. Sure, I'll think twice about camping in isolated areas from now on, but I won't let fear steal my love for adventure. After all, now we've got one hell of a campfire story. I never imagined a broken coffee maker would save my life. But that's exactly what happened. If that old machine hadn't finally given up, spilling its last bitter drops and dying in a puff of smoke, I might have walked straight into disaster. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how I fell for a monster and fought my way back to freedom. It all began on a rainy Tuesday. Sleep-deprived and desperate for caffeine, I ducked into the first cafe I spotted on my walk to work, and that's where I met Mark. He stood ahead of me in line, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a smile that could light up a room. When the barista called out his order, a vanilla latte, he caught me looking and grinned. "Sweet tooth, huh?" he teased, lifting his cup. I laughed, caught off guard. "No judgment here," I said. "I'm about to order something even worse." We started talking, small chat at first, but it quickly turned into real conversation. Somehow, I found myself sitting down with him, sipping my drink and losing track of time. One coffee turned into an hour. I was hopelessly late for work. But for the first time in ages, I didn't care. Mark was funny, charming, and he listened to me like every word mattered. As I stood to leave, already scrambling for an excuse to tell my boss, Mark reached out and touched my hand lightly. "Can I see you again?" he asked, those striking blue eyes, hopeful. Without thinking, I said yes. No hesitation, no second guessing. Looking back, I wonder if everything would have been different if I'd just smiled and walked away that day. But fate doesn't offer do-overs. Our first official date was straight out of a dream. Mark took me to a tiny, hidden Italian place I'd never even noticed before. He pulled out my chair, ordered the perfect wine, and hung onto every word I said like it was the most important thing he'd ever heard. I fell fast and hard. It was late, a heavy, suffocating kind of night, when the mask finally slipped. We'd argued over something stupid. I don't even remember what started it. All I remember is how fast it escalated. 1 second, he was shouting. The next, he grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. I stared at him stunned, my heart thundering in my ears. This wasn't the Mark I knew. Or maybe this had always been the real Mark, hiding beneath the charm and sweet words. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely, his face crumpling like a boy caught doing something bad. He dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness, tears streaming down his cheeks. And for a moment, God help me, I almost forgave him. Because that's what he was counting on my kindness, on my fear, on the version of me he had spent months carefully building, someone who doubted herself, who thought she deserved this. But something inside me shifted that night, a tiny spark, a reminder of the girl who had once walked into a cafe without fear, who had laughed at a stranger's joke, who still existed under all the fear and self-doubt. I smiled at him then, a hollow, careful smile, and told him it was okay, that I loved him, that we could fix it. And while he slept, still clutching my hand, I made my plan. I was going to leave, no matter what it took. I didn't sleep that night. I lay still, heart racing, waiting for the sky outside to turn from black to gray. As soon as Mark's breathing deepened, that slow, heavy rhythm of true sleep, I slipped out of bed. Barefoot, silent, I crept to where I'd hidden a spare key and my wallet. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a gunshot. I half expected him to wake up, to grab me again, to drag me back into the nightmare. But he didn't stir. With shaking hands, I eased the door open and stepped into the cold, damp. By the time dessert came around, I was already half in love. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mark was attentive, calling and texting regularly. He surprised me with flowers at work, planned romantic picnics, and always seemed to know just what to say to make me smile. My friends were thrilled for me. "He sounds amazing," my best friend Sarah gushed over brunch. "You deserve this, Em, after everything with Jake." She trailed off, but I knew what she meant. My ex, Jake, had been a nightmare, controlling, jealous, and eventually abusive. It had taken me months to break free from that relationship. Mark was like a breath of fresh air after being underwater for so long, or so I thought. The first red flag was so small, I almost missed it. We were out at a bar with some of Mark's friends. I was chatting with one of the guys about a book we'd both read when Mark came over, sliding his arm around my waist. His grip a little too tight, his smile a little too forced. "Having fun?" he asked, but his eyes were cold. Later that night, he exploded. "What the hell was that?" he demanded as soon as we were alone. "Flirting with Tom right in front of me?" I was stunned. "Flirting? Mark, we were just talking about a book." But he wouldn't hear it. He ranted for what felt like hours, accusing me of disrespecting him, of trying to make him jealous. By the end of it, I was in tears, apologizing for something I hadn't even done. The next morning, he was all apologies. "I'm so sorry, baby," he said, bringing me breakfast in bed. "I don't know what came over me. I just care about you so much. The thought of losing you scares me." I forgave him, of course. After all, everyone has bad moments, right? But that was just the beginning. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Mark began to change. Or maybe the mask just started to slip. He wanted to know where I was all the time, who I was with, what I was wearing. He'd show up unannounced at my workplace, claiming he just wanted to surprise me. He insisted I share my phone's location for safety. My world began to shrink. I saw my friends less and less. Mark always had a reason why we couldn't go out, why we should stay in, just the two of us. When I did see them, he'd blow up my phone with texts and calls. "I just miss you," he'd say when I confronted him about it. "Is it so wrong to want to talk to my girlfriend?" I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe this was just what love looked like. Then came the night that changed everything. We were at his place having dinner. I mentioned that a coworker had invited me to a concert that weekend. Mark's face darkened. "Who's this coworker?" he demanded. "Just a friend," I said, my stomach already knotting with anxiety. "His name's Alex. He had an extra ticket and—" I didn't get to finish. Mark's fist came down on the table so hard that glasses toppled over, spilling red wine across the white tablecloth like blood. "You're going out with another man," he roared. "It's not like that," I protested, my voice small. "It's just a concert. There'll be a whole group of us." But Mark was beyond reason. He advanced on me, his face twisted with rage. For the next few weeks were hell. Mark called and texted constantly. He showed up at my work, my apartment, even Sarah's place. Each time he swung between desperate pleas for forgiveness and veiled threats. "You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do," he'd say. "You're making a big mistake. You'll regret this." I changed my number, my email. I even moved to a new apartment. But still, he found ways to reach me. It all came to a head one rainy night. I was walking home from the subway when I saw him. Mark was leaning against my building, his eyes locked on me. My blood ran cold. "Emily," he called out, his voice deceptively gentle. "We need to talk." I turned and ran. I could hear his footsteps behind me getting closer. Rain lashed at my face as I sprinted down the street, my heart pounding in my ears. I ducked into an all-night diner, breathless and soaked. The waitress took one look at my face and ushered me to a booth in the back. "You okay, honey?" she asked, concern etched on her weathered face. I shook my head, tears mixing with raindrops on my cheeks. "There's a man. He's following me. He won't leave me alone." Understanding dawned in her eyes. She nodded once, then turned to the cook. "Call the cops, and Joe, we've got a situation." When the police arrived, I told them everything, the emotional abuse, the control, the stalking. They took my statement and promised to pick Mark up for questioning. As I sat there, wrapped in a blanket the kind waitress had given me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. The road to recovery wasn't easy. There were restraining orders, court dates, and countless therapy sessions. There were nights when I woke up in a cold sweat, certain I'd heard Mark's voice. Days when I jumped at every shadow, convinced he was just around the corner. But slowly, surely, I began to heal. I reconnected with friends, threw myself into work, and started to rediscover who I was, without the shadow of Mark looming over me. Now, as I sit here in that same cafe where it all began, I can't help but reflect on how far I've come. The Emily who met Mark that day feels like a stranger to me now, someone who was looking for love in all the wrong places, willing to accept crumbs of affection and call it a feast. But the Emily writing this, she knows her worth. She knows that real love doesn't diminish you, it helps you grow. Real love is supportive, not suffocating. Real love is a partnership, not a possession. I'm not ready to date again, not yet. But when I am, I'll be going in with my eyes wide open, because while my experience with Mark was traumatic, it taught me valuable lessons about red flags, about trusting my instincts, and most importantly, about the strength I have within me. So if you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, know this. You're stronger than you think. You deserve better. And there is a way out. As for me, I'm ordering my coffee with extra sugar, just because I can. And I'm looking forward to whatever the future holds, because for the first time in a long time, that future is entirely my own. The word mysterium rang in Gabriel's mind like a hidden bell struck deep within the earth. For a moment, he forgot the gloom of the chamber, the whispering sands outside, even the blade still slick with black ichor in his hand. All he could see was the glimmer of possibility. "Is that why you brought me here?" he asked, voice raw. "To show me this?" The watcher tilted its head, the motion disjointed and alien. "You are both the seeker and the key," it said. "You always have been." Around them the stones of the ruin began to hum, faint at first, then louder, a resonance rising from the depths, vibrating in Gabriel's bones. His vision blurred, and for a heartbeat he stood elsewhere. A light. Gabriel stepped into the light. The ruins vanished. A new world unfolded. Sky turned violet. Earth healed. He walked to the mysterium, heart steady. Touching the door, he whispered. From ashes a new dawn, light engulfed him. Memories, hopes, and dreams merged within. When he emerged, life bloomed around him. He was no savior. He was the beginning. Dear listeners, I hope you enjoyed the story. Please subscribe, like, and share.